I want to bring in Eoghan Corry, editor of TravelExtra.ie. So we're going to talk about how this will affect, because this is going to affect travel between Ireland and Britain for all of us, and obviously freight, everything else as well. So Eoghan, if we start with drivers, like there was this talk that a driver who wanted to go over the border would need some kind of a green card. Does that still stand now, or where's that at?
This is going to throw back to the before the barriers came down, before the borders came down, and getting your car insured in another jurisdiction. It used to be a drama. You had to contact your insurance company, they had to give clearance. You then had enforcement where they stopped and they looked for proof of insurance. An entire generation has grown up without that. The insurance companies themselves are the first to flag this. The real problem here is no matter what bare bones agreements are put together, there would be probably a few panic-stricken agreements in the run-up to March the 29th. It'll come back to the insurance companies whether they have separate sets of regulations, insurance company by insurance company. So it is potentially a free-for-all.
And even on that, the Transport Minister Shane Ross was before the Transport Committee, and he was asked about this green card, whether if someone is stopped the other side of the border without their green card on them that day, would perhaps, is the case in other jurisdictions, would they have their vehicle confiscated, or what kind of penalties would apply? And the
regulations are there for that.
Well, he actually couldn't answer that. He didn't know. So if the Transport Minister doesn't know, how is someone living in Newry wanting to come down to Dundalk, or vice versa, supposed to know?
In the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had an increase in enforcement by Northern Ireland's police force on things like Irish tour guides picking up at Belfast Airport.
Really?
There is a whole set of regulatory problems that are existing regulatory problems. They're caused by the absence of a secretariat in Northern Ireland to actually solve them. But we have existing problems with pretty rigorous enforcement of by police of stopping vehicles registered in Ireland. And obviously, there are political and sectarian implications for this, because some parts of Northern Ireland seem to be more rigorous in this than others. It's the green card problem. To answer your question, it's going to be a free-for-all with not just the regulators involved, but also the insurance companies. And as we well know, the listeners well know, insurance companies are very, very quick to enforce terms and conditions on their own terms. If anything arises, it's not a problem actually when you're driving up and down, but if any single incident arises, insurance companies will start rushing to terms and conditions, which are very unclear under Brexit.
Now, in terms of lorries, obviously there's this spectre of queues of lorries at ports, not just in England, but here in Ireland as well. Tell us about the plans being explored to park lorries in Dublin Airport.
The problem with the border is being flagged. The first into the fray, if this doesn't go well on March 29th, are going to be our ferry companies. They're going to be our ports. It means immediately spot checks. It means particularly livestock and certain other goods like that will have to be vetted coming out of one set of regulations into another.
Have we not been told that there will be is there a period of 9 months where nothing will change?
You're absolutely right, Brendan. There are 2 bare bones agreements which were rushed through just before Christmas. One applies to aviation, and it sounds better than it is. It means that the first, second, third and fourth freedom rights that were enjoyed by UK carriers continue for 12 months until the end of March of 2020. There's a ferry agreement, but most of what they're concentrating on is the permits that exporters and freight companies hold. That would have been given the amount of freight from Ireland that travels through the UK to reach our big markets out in Germany and Belgium, that would have been a huge problem. But that's been given just a 9-month stay of execution. There are so many caveats on that it's if it was coming fresh to us, it would be a huge problem. But people are actually seeing that as an improvement. The port situation that you're talking about, you can see a plot of land about 2 kilometres from Rosslare being identified by Irish authorities. These are our customs and revenue authorities. They also have Dublin Port of its own volition, because expansion in a very tight area with no extra land, has a site of 22 acres or 22 hectares out on the Ashburn Road. These are sort of stopgap provisions, because we actually haven't. Are we talking
about massive queues down through the port tunnel then, as they
can't queue in the port tunnel, and this is the Irish port situation has been widely reported in Ireland. The Holyhead situation, where almost an immense proportion of our exports go through Holyhead. There is no provision whatsoever for Irish exports to be vetted as they go out. This is really serious. This could end the scheduling of ferries across the Irish Sea. A ferry has a 2-hour turnaround. Both Stena and Irish Ferries, who dominate that route, are saying that they have no idea how they're going to continue a 2-hour turnaround. And their business plan for the new ferries that are being introduced on that route is based on 2-hour turnarounds and the revenue streams and everything like that. They're not in a position, particularly, during 3 months of summer, there's a lot of tourists on that route. They're not in a position to leave their big customers for 9 months of the year, which is freight, behind. They're not in a situation to sail with 2 lorries, because a whole lot of them are caught up in customs. And what happens when all of that lands in Holyhead? How do you unload? How do you turn around? Both the major companies are looking at a situation where the schedule that they have for ferries could turn into we sail when we're ready in those initial months of after a no-deal Brexit.
And what about flights then? What's the situation going to be there?
Flights are very interesting. We have a continuation of flights where UK and Irish airlines can continue to fly into each other. And remember, there's about more than 30% of what goes through Dublin Airport is bound to the UK. That is capped. There's a couple of problems that are going to immediately arise. There's a cap on the 2018 summer levels on that. That means a new route, and we have a couple of them, like Ryanair to Southend is supposed to start this March. It wasn't there last summer. That's technically in danger under the agreement. Of more immediate interest to those of us who jump up and down at rugby matches, the charter flights for Munster's match to Edinburgh, if you look at your ticket, if you look at the advertising, is subject to Brexit agreement, because there weren't that number of flights going to Edinburgh last April in 2018 because Munster weren't playing there. So every single thing that we take for granted, that freedom, and some of us around the table will be old enough to remember when reciprocity, that horrible word that meant that from an airline from one country could only fly to another if reciprocity was given to the second, and those agreements we had in the 80s that kept fares over £200. All of those things that an entire generation has grown up not knowing are back, looming up like Dracula re-emerging from the grave.
And you see, this is the thing. I don't think that this stuff feels very real to most of us. But
it may not feel very real to most of us. But firstly, all that legislation, those couple of key pieces of legislation rushed through the European Parliament and the European legislative process this week. The biggest contingent on them is reciprocity. You pronounce it for me.
Reciprocity.
That the British Parliament will do the same as the European other Parliament has done. And the capacity of the British Parliament to mess around with some of that stuff could be extraordinary in the months to come. But here's what I think is happening, though. In the minds of senior British politicians and officials, all of that detail that Eoghan has worked through, for example, on transport and aviation, and has been worked through as scenarios on every sector, and it is terrifying them. The interesting stories over the weekend in the Telegraph even yesterday about 20 to 30 serving ministers at senior or junior level in the Conservative Party saying they will resign rather than let no deal happen on the 29th of March. So as I've been arguing for months, the more the risks of no deal are magnified as are coloured, as it were, rather than just as black and white vague notion, but are magnified or we get closer to it, the more the chances of Brexit being delayed will increase and increase dramatically.
But you know what you'd wonder?
Of what outcome
this has been all
Brexit is going to be delayed.
But this has been all so cack-handed so far. I was reading a guy a few weeks ago, that undercover economist guy, and he was saying, okay, if you're going to play brinksmanship, you're going to play chicken, and you want credibility that you'll do something nuts, you have to convince the person either that you're crazy or you put in what he called a doomsday machine. Yeah. A doomsday machine being that all other things being equal, if we don't come to an agreement, we crash out at the end of that month. Now, he said the problem with a doomsday machine is that doomsday machines go off by accident.
Yeah, but
and I think it seems quite... It's not beyond the bounds of possibility.
It's not beyond the bounds of possibility, but
something could happen here by accident.
Let's not catastrophize, because we do know one thing for clear. We know that there is a majority in Westminster for one thing, which is to change the legislation to delay Brexit on the 29th of March. That's the one thing we are sure. And that's in part why the European Union and even the Irish government, although it's nerve-wracking to have the concept of a no-deal Brexit still on the table and as it were still be the de facto legislative position, they're a bit more sanguine because they're quite happy to let Theresa May engage in this structured inactivity and window dressing diplomacy, because ultimately there's a confidence that perhaps at the end of February, and if not into the middle of March, Westminster will say, whatever happens, delay this now and then sort out after that. The problem is that's costing people in our businesses and organisations money and panic in the meantime.
The one issue though with the delaying...
Michael and then Elaine.
I'm absolutely convinced it has to be delayed. I cannot see that the planning to execute this situation can take place in the chaos that's going to come around. And the point I would make about the whole Brexit, I was always of the view that there would be a second, referendum, because people didn't know what they were voting on. I'm back there often enough to know that people still don't know what's going to be the outcome. And in a way, I think it's a failure of politics that there was a referendum, there was a result, and the politicians are incapable of actually dealing with it. So I'm convinced there has to be a delay. I'm convinced that the thing has to be re-looked at again, and I am shocked by the lack of planning for an exit.
The one thing about a delay, though, is, and especially in the British media and in members of the House of Commons over there, it seems to be Theresa May can just go over to Europe and say, I want to delay and I want to delay Article 50. It's not as simple as that. The Article 50 extension has to be agreed by all 27 leaders. Now, I'm not saying that won't happen, but there's a lot of leaders in Europe who are not quite as focused on Brexit as we are. They're looking, especially in the eastern side of Europe, they're looking at the migrant crisis as a massive issue. And Brexit, although it's increasing in urgency now, is still only second or third on their list of priorities. Secondly, if the extension is given to Article 50, we then have an issue around the European elections in May. So you either give an extension until May and don't elect any new British MEPs, or you have to give a rather substantial delay, perhaps of a year or 2 years, to Theresa May.
I think they're talking about 2020. Don't you want to come in?
Yeah, it's been referred to, but the lack of leadership has been mentioned a few times this morning, and lack of vision, and the pace with which some of the key players just left the field, having engineered the vote and nowhere to be seen. From the medical side of things, we have an existing relationship with the UK around a cross-border directive and a treatment abroad scheme, where patients who need certain forms of chemotherapy that we don't have here, or certain forms of scans, get to go over.
Which I understand will continue.
Will not be affected by Brexit, and that's important because there is actually quite a lot of anxiety around about Brexit, and particularly in our older population who saw Ireland emerge through the kind of 70s, 80s through to Good Friday.
I would say that,
and they're a little bit, when you start in your 80s, you go into a bit of cognitive decline. Brexit is a major focus of anxiety, and the media jamboree around it.
And we've just done that in our catastrophe conversation. I lived in London for 20 years. I just sold my house. I have never seen London so quiet. When I was over there this week, you get into any restaurant, all of the estate agents that I would normally work with say the house prices are starting to plummet. It is in a recession, because what nobody in London wants, the taxi drivers, the uncertainty, same as the economists, because nobody knows what's going to happen. People are holding on to their money. The currency fluctuations are quite extreme at the moment, so the city's not outspending. So I definitely think that the unease that people feel is more about the uncertainty. That final week, everybody in London, that's why I asked Dennis, is talking about this huge, big public demonstration on the 23rd, put it to the people. There was 700,000 came out in October for that. followed by this lethal amendment to see if they can push for
Dennis. Dennis?
Yes.
Are you still with us?
I am.
Having heard the view from the Skibbereen Eagle here, and all of us, are we all deluded? Are we living in cloud cuckoo land? What's your take on it?
The Skibbereen Eagle was always a very clear-eyed bird, but I think that I think one thing, it's probably true, as everybody there has said, that they will seek an extension of Article 50. But I would just caution Noel that we do know that there is a majority. A majority was stated, which said we are against a no-deal Brexit. But Yvette Cooper could not, a couple of weeks ago, assemble a majority for a mechanism to actually do that, for a mechanism to postpone Article 50. Now, maybe she'll be able to do that in 2 weeks' time. Certainly, they're more confident about doing it in 2 weeks' time or not. But I just wouldn't underestimate the capacity for the system here to fall over itself and simply not to act in a rational fashion. I think, both of the political parties are divided, both are dysfunctional in their own way, and while I think a no-deal Brexit on March 29th is unlikely, it is the default option. Somebody has to do something to stop it, and I just wouldn't place all my money or even a slightly depreciating London house on all of that happening.
No, but I think two things on that. One, the reason Yvette Cooper didn't get her majority the last time is because Theresa May, in her speech at that debate, said they will get a chance to make that decision later on, and they will in a couple of weeks' time, or again perhaps even in 3 or 4 weeks' time. Secondly, what hasn't happened yet is the breakaway from the Conservative Party against no deal to those resignations to cabinet. And I think it is in fact that they're informed by how scary the concept of a no-deal Brexit is. I mean, you hear the business minister and others say, I'm reading this stuff. We talk here about travel in the areas of financial instruments, in the areas of domain name and all of that. There's just so many potentials for something to go wrong that I think ultimately they will.
And I didn't ask you, how do you feel this is all going to pan out?
I do think they'll vote again. I do think that they, it looked a bit more likely about 3 weeks ago than it is now. I do think they have a date for it. May the 2nd, you heard it here first, will be the next referendum on Brexit. And I think that
this is scoop indeed.
It's just because they're voting anyway. If let's say if we'd had Bertie Ahern in charge of that referendum, he'd have gone to Brussels and said, cut me a deal, give me something that I can bring back to the people and compliment them and say, you were very clever people to vote to leave. Now we have a new deal. And that's probably what would happen. Noel was coming in.
No, there are two observations on the second vote. First is there are a whole range of legal mechanisms around holding a referendum in Britain because they don't have the structured constitutional system we have, which mean they couldn't do a referendum by May. And secondly, I caution, we talked to the Irish community in London, we talked to Londoners, and they all remember voted to remain. The position has not changed among much of the community that voted for it. They just want out. They're not worried about the concerns.
I'd say is that young
and so therefore it will take time at least to change those minds.
The only thing I'd say is most of the people that I know who were Remainers actually feel a little bit more hardline because of the EU's attitude. So there's a lot of emotion going on instead of the head. But secondly, I'd say if there was another referendum, it's young people that would save the day. But they didn't vote first time round.
Yeah, and they seem to be saying that they're hoping to win it by young people who were under the voting age. But I think if you're relying on the people who came of age since the last referendum,
you have to delay first. You have a long period of delay that allows the car to stop, reverse, turn around. You can't.
Okay, this country needs it to delay more than any other country in Europe.
Yeah, the best we can all hope for.
My favourite Brexit quote of the week from the Dutch newspaper Tro is when Theresa May re-emerged from the House of Commons, said it's like the passengers of the Titanic saying the iceberg has to get out of the way.
Yeah. So look, I think the best we can all hope for is that what Leo Varadkar called this purgatory will continue for another while. So Dennis Staunton in London and Eoghan Corry, thank you very much, and we'll take a break.
Podcast The Marian Finucane Show at rte.ie/radio.